Hi, and welcome to Bite-Sized Bat Reps, where we bring you great battle reports without taking up a great deal of your time. So, we're back with the By Fire and Sword narrative campaign game. If you missed episode 1, as this is episode 2, then check out the link and go check it out. If you remember from the previous game, this is a battle between the Swedes led by General H. Horn and the Tartars led by Niall Bay, and they're meeting around the town of Kobograd. Last time they skirmished in the center where the Tartars were able to score a small victory and gain some reconnaissance advantage. And this time around, the generals are eyeing Pontar Hill, which is a very important strategic feature of the battlefield. And so both of them send skirmishing forces to try to take the hill early ahead of the battle so that they can take advantage of it in the coming big engagement. So we'll play a take and hold scenario for the control of Pontar Hill. Let's get going. So the forces are very similar to the ones we saw last time, which is a veteran rater force led by Colonel Stigson this time around, and the Tartars are led by Mirza Rinat. The Tartars still have a 2-point force disadvantage, so they get 2 effects, which is panic and march losses again, and they have a massive recon advantage as previously. Here's a look at the Swedes and the Tartars. And here's the battlefield. So you can see Pontar Hill dominates the center of the map, and that's the major objective worth 4 points, with the 2 approaches to the hill worth 1 point each. And before the game starts, we take a quick look at the commanders, Mirza Rinat and Colonel Sigson's veteran armored rapiers, the best troops that the Swedes can field. Okay, so now we apply the effects, and the Swedes are off to a rather rough start. The march losses hit their armored veterans, so these guys take 1 base of losses, which is essentially 25% of their force, and then they get hit with a panic effect, which means they start the game disorganized and lose their order. So they're basically withdrawing back and starting the game milling about, unsure what to do. And then the chaos effect hits the armored, the arquebus armed rapiers. So they also withdraw. And what's worse is that they withdraw into the lieutenant colonel, who panics at as he sees his forces withdrawing back towards him and flees. And for the reconnaissance effects for the Tartars, they do a forced march with 6 bases, and then a flanking maneuver with 6 more bases like previously. So, start of the turn for the Swedes. Colonel Stigson is very concerned about how this engagement is going. He knows that the middle engagement for the center of the field didn't go very well, the initial skirmish. He's seen the reports, and he is very worried that his entire left flank is now disorganized, and that one of his commanders decided to quit the field and flee back towards the division. So he moves towards the left to try to rally his troops, and he pushes up his right side towards the objective just to start trying to claim some initiative in this battle. The Tartars move up in a basically a line. And at the end of the turn, their flanking maneuver goes off, and 6 bases of warriors show up on the Swedish left flank. Which, actually for the story of the game makes perfect sense, because the middle skirmish for the center of the field is over at this point, and so the Tartars are able to send some forces to reinforce the battle for Pontar Hill from the left side, so that's actually very appropriate. And here's a quick look at Mirza Rinat, who's eyeing Pontar Hill. One more quick look at end of turn 1. Okay, turn 2. So, big news is that Colonel Stigson spends all of his command trying to rally his troops and get the veterans back in the game, but they just don't listen. They're too rattled from what they've heard the Tartars did to their forces in the center of the field, and they're still disorganized. They can't get themselves back. And so in their movement, The veterans on the left just pull back a little bit to try to protect their flank, and on the right side the Swedes basically hold the line because they don't want to push up too far ahead without any of the support. The Tartars respond with closing the distance to the Swedes, and there's this funny lopsided shape forming that's basically like a half encirclement of the Swedish force. They're also able to take Pontar Hill unopposed. The Swedes are far away, they're not challenging them, so the Tartars easily move onto the hill and seize the objective. And a quick look at the right side, the National Raters are staring at their adversary. Turn 3. So Colonel Stigson is finally able to rally his veterans on the left. So these guys are now back in the battle, but he doesn't have enough command to give them an order. So the Swedes are ordered, but they can't actually do anything useful. So they'll just stand there. However, he does decide that he can't let the Tartars have all of the initiative, and on the right side, those thorax will now encircle them, the Swedes on the right side, which would be a complete disaster. So he orders his National Raters to charge forward and try to break up the Tartar lines a little bit. So in the movement phase, on the left side, the Swedes pull back, trying to protect their flanks even more, and on the right side, they charge into the Tartars, who don't withdraw and will fight the combat. For his part, Mirza Rimat decides to go on the offensive as well. He's got a massive numerical advantage on the left side, and so he orders a charge with 12 bases of Tartars, who move in, surrounding the veterans. And the remaining Tartar moves are like so, including a charge down Pontar Hill. So those 3 bases that occupied the hill have now attacked the Swedes coming up towards the hill. And on the left side, the Tartars charge the Swedes, and they fire their bows in the charge, and with their massive numbers and the massive amount of arrows flying, they're able to cause enough wounds to kill a base and force a panic test, which the veterans fail, and they fail it terribly, and they actually break outright from the combat. What's worse, they flee straight through the disorganized armored veterans, who also fail their panic test, and they also flee, leaving Colonel Stigson baffled as he looks on at his elite fighting force just running away, running straight through him, with him unable to stop them. On the right side, however, the National Raters do much better. They cause some wounds on the Tartars and push them back and smash into the other Tartar group. But from Pontar Hill, that combat goes worse for the Swedes. So the Tartars come streaming down the hill, cause enough wounds with shooting and combat to force the veterans to withdraw. And here are the Tartars chasing the broken veterans on the left side. And back on the right side, the Nationals fight their second round of combat with the second Thorac, and again they do really well, cause enough hits to actually break the Tartars. So at least one Tartar Thorac is now broken and fleeing. However, the charge from Pontar Hill goes well for the Tartars. They are now outnumbering the veterans 3-1, so they easily win combat, and the single base of veterans breaks and flees as well. And here is end of turn 3. It's not a good start or middle of the game for Colonel Stigson. He is extremely concerned. All of his veterans are now fleeing. The only force he has in the game or on the battlefield still is the National Raters, who are up top next to Pontar Hill. Start of turn 4. Colonel Stigson is able to rally one of his units. The veterans are under the arquebuses, rally and reorganize their lines and face the attackers, but the other Raters do not rally, and so they will withdraw from the field. Quick look at the right side, right off of Pontar Hill. and the Swedish moves. So with the remaining units quitting the field, the Swedes now only have 2 units remaining on the field, and so both commanders decide to join them because there's no point in being left in the open and risking getting shot at. And the raiders on next to Pontar Hill decide to advance on the objective. The Tartars are a little bit out of place, and if they can get onto the hill, if they can make it to the top and set up a defensive formation, they might be able to hold off the Tartars who will be charging up the hill. Here's hoping. But Mirza Rinat will have none of it. He has a clever plan. He decides to charge with a small thorac of Tartars into the Swedish flank. And this is not a combat that he can win, but it's a clever ploy. As the Tartars now move into the center of the field and kind of start pressuring the Swedes. And the reason that charge was so clever was that combat happens and the Tartars cause some wounds and lose some wounds and they essentially lose the combat, and with a draw, the Swedes are forced to chase them. The major does not have enough command to restrain his units, his warriors, and the Swedes give chase, and they chase the Tartars right off of their objective, and so now they're again nowhere near getting to the top of the hill, which puts them in a significant disadvantage of a position. And here's end of turn 4. Turn 5. So here's where Colonel Stigson has some serious decisions to make. He can either go on the offensive, and even though he's completely outnumbered, he actually has the Tartars in a pretty good place because they're kind of stuck between 2 Swedish forces, which means that he could actually catch some of them with spirited charges and maybe break up their lines. But he's still rattled from having lost more than half of his army, having routed off the field. And he decides to go defensive. And so he throws a defense order on the veterans on the bottom right and a move order on the raiders up top, trying to get them back onto the hill. And so in their moves, the Swedes pushed back towards the hill and set up a caracal with the arquebuses trying to score some hits onto the Tartars and disorganize their ranks and maybe do something. But Mirza Rinat sees this as an opportunity and prepares to charge the Swedes, who are now just slowly trying to get back onto the hill. So the Tartars charge with 2 units into the raiders, and the defensive formation on the bottom right actually did do what Colonel Stigson wanted it to do. It scored a hit onto that one big Tartar formation, forces a panic test, and does disorganize it. So that unit is temporarily out of the battle, but it's just not enough. In the combat, the Tatar horde smashes into the raiders, into their flank and rear, causes a bunch of wounds, and breaks the unit. And the raiders withdraw further after the second round of combat. And here's the end of turn 5, with the only remaining Swedish unit being the veterans at the bottom right. Turn 6. The major desperately tries to rally his fleeing raiders, but he's unable to do so, and they will keep on fleeing now back towards their own lines, which is straight into the Tatar hands. For his part, Colonel Stigson decides that he might as well go out fighting, and he has a chance of actually catching the Tartars that are up top, the disorganized ones. So he decides to finish the day with one last charge. But as it turns out, it's mistimed. He charges the Tartars, who withdraw successfully. And just the way the charges work, his impetus is lost before his enemies charges him. And his veterans, for all their skill, are unable to maintain the charge and get disorganized right before the Tartars charge into them and attack them while they're not in a fighting formation, which again ends the only way it could, and the Tartars win the combat easily, and the veterans flee off the table. And here's the end of the game. So as you can see, the only Swedish force remaining on the field is the Major, who is now completely out of position. He's actually closer to the Tatar divisional lines, and he'll be carefully circling through those woods, trying desperately to get back into to his own units, to his division, and get ready for the coming battles. Pontar Hill is completely in Tatar hands. So the official outcome of the game. Well, it did not go very well for the Swedes, as you can see. So the hill is fully controlled by Tatars for 6 points, and the Swedes actually end up losing 17 points, and it's thanks to that Bellum saves Mallet rule, where they suffer extra losses for fleeing bases, which makes this game a massacre versus the Tatar acceptable losses, which is a strategic victory for the Tatars. And in terms of the campaign games, well, the Pontar Hill is now completely and security controlled by the Tatars, so they'll be able to deploy significant forces on that hill in the coming divisional battle. And the only chance that General Horn has for saving this final engagement is to take Kobograd and anchor his defensive lines inside the small town, which, given that the Swedes have a very strong fire base in their division, is actually a very good strategy for him. So he will now send his best commander, best colonel, to take Kobograd at any cost. And to find out whether he succeeds or not, tune in to the next game in the series when we battle over Kobograd. See you next time on Bite-Sized Bat Reps.